In the mid-1980s, the FBI was losing the Cold War in silence. There were no explosions, no public scandals, and no emergency press conferences. Instead, something far more disturbing was happening behind closed doors. American intelligence assets inside the Soviet system were vanishing. Not disappearing, not simply going dark. They were being summoned home, and they were not coming back. Inside the FBI and CIA, analysts noticed a pattern that should not have existed. They had been carefully recruited, thoroughly vetted, and known only to a handful of people. One by one, they were exposed. And when exposure happens this cleanly, this precisely, there is only one explanation. Someone on the inside is talking. The problem was not finding evidence of a leak. The problem was finding where the leak could possibly be. Because the damage did not look chaotic. It looked curated. It suggested someone with access, patience, and discipline. Someone who understood not just classified information, but the structure of the system itself. That realization triggered the most dangerous phase of any counterintelligence investigation, the internal hunt. When an intelligence agency suspects a traitor within its own ranks, it does not look for recklessness. It looks for invisibility. And that is why the FBI turned to a man who, by design, never stood out. Robert Hanssen. At first glance, Hanssen was unremarkable. He was not a field hero. He did not run sources in dark alleys. He did not interrogate suspects or kick down doors. He was an analyst, a systems man, a quiet presence in a world obsessed with noise. To his superiors, that made him ideal. Hanssen understood Soviet tradecraft at a structural level. He studied patterns rather than personalities. He built databases, not legends. He knew how intelligence moved. So when the Bureau needed someone to help identify the mole responsible for the worst counterintelligence losses in decades, Hanssen was not just trusted, he was respected. No one objected. No one hesitated. The irony was perfect.
Because while the FBI was assigning Robert Hanssen to hunt a traitor, the betrayal had already been underway for years. Every morning, Hanssen left his home in Vienna, Virginia, like any other federal employee. The same streets, the same schedule, the same routine. But less than 3 minutes away sat a place that never appeared in any official report: Foxstone Park, a small, quiet park with a footbridge most people never noticed. On certain days, Hanssen would park nearby and walk alone toward that bridge. He carried nothing that looked suspicious, no briefcase, no envelope, just an ordinary plastic bag. Inside were documents that could unravel lives. He would leave the bag beneath the bridge, walk away calmly, and place a small strip of tape vertically on a nearby signpost. To a passerby, it meant nothing. To someone trained to look for it, the signal was unmistakable. Later, another strip of tape would appear, horizontal this time, confirmation and then payment. This ritual would repeat itself for more than 2 decades. While the FBI studied Soviet espionage, Hanssen refined his own method. While his colleagues searched for behavioral anomalies, Hanssen perfected normalcy. He did not drink excessively. He did not gamble. He did not flaunt money. He attended church regularly. He brought his children to Mass. He spoke openly about morality and faith. Nothing about him fit the profile of a traitor, and that was not an accident. What no one inside the FBI understood, not yet, was that Robert Hanssen did not become a spy because he was recruited. He became a spy because he chose to be one. He was not coerced, blackmailed, or desperate. He walked into the enemy's world voluntarily, carrying with him something far more dangerous than ideology. He carried certainty, that he was smarter than the system, that he could control outcomes, and that he could live 2 lives without consequence. And for a very long time, he was right. Because the most effective traitor is never the one who runs. It is the one who stays. And the FBI had just placed the hunt for a ghost into the hands of the man who cast the shadow.
Long before the FBI ever trusted him with secrets, Robert Hanssen learned something far more useful. He learned how authority feels when it is absolute. Hansen did not grow up in chaos. There were no broken homes, no visible instability. From the outside, his childhood looked orderly. Inside the house, it was something else entirely. His father was a police officer, a man who believed respect was extracted, not earned. A man who viewed weakness as something to be eliminated early. Affection was conditional, praise was rare, silence was common. Discipline, however, was constant. As a child, Hansen was subjected to punishments that were framed as preparation. It was always framed as training, as toughening. His father would roll him tightly inside a carpet or a military-style mattress, pinning his arms so he could not move. Then he would spin him over and over until the room dissolved, until nausea replaced balance, until fear became the lesson. It was always explained the same way. This is how men are made. What Hansen learned instead was something far more enduring, that power belongs to the one who decides when suffering begins and when it ends. As he grew older, the punishments changed shape but not meaning. In his teenage years, Hansen trained relentlessly for his driver's license. To him, it represented independence, a first escape. Without telling him, his father intervened, quietly, deliberately. Hansen failed, not because he was unprepared, but because success had been denied. The message was never spoken aloud. It didn't need to be. You advance only when permission is granted. By the time Hansen reached adulthood, something inside him had hardened. Outwardly, he appeared compliant, reserved, emotionally contained. Inwardly, resentment had learned to stay quiet. He became someone who did not lash out. He stored anger. He compartmentalized it. And this skill, more than intelligence or ideology, would later protect him. Hansen gravitated toward numbers, systems, and rules. Accounting made sense. An MBA made sense. Numbers did not humiliate you. Systems did not betray you. When he joined the Chicago police departments in the early 1970s, it looked like imitation, a son following his father's path. In reality, it was competition. This time, Hansen would not be blocked. This time, he would move beyond the man who had controlled him. But local policing was not enough. 3 years later, Hansen joined the FBI. For him, the Bureau was not just an employer. It was a structure built on secrecy, hierarchy, and obedience. Everything he understood, everything he respected. Inside the FBI, Hansen was not charismatic. He did not inspire loyalty. He did not build friendships. He built distance. He avoided socializing, declined casual interactions, stayed invisible. Colleagues would later describe him as cold, aloof, unapproachable. They mistook this for awkwardness. It was discipline. Hansen learned quickly that visibility invites scrutiny. Silence does not. He gravitated toward roles that rewarded precision over personality, white-collar crime, financial analysis, data systems. He was effective, reliable, forgettable. And then came the moment that quietly reshaped everything. Counterintelligence. This was the inner machinery of the Cold War, the place where patterns mattered more than people, where secrets moved through systems rather than hands. Hansen now had access not just to information, but to how information flowed. He learned who was being watched, who was being recruited, who was being protected. He saw the architecture of secrecy from the inside, and he noticed something that few others ever did. Every system, no matter how sophisticated, relies on trust. Trust in clearance, trust in rank, trust in routine. Once you fit inside the system stops questioning you. This realization did not produce panic or fear. It produced clarity.
Hansen was not angry at the FBI. He was not disillusioned with America. He did not feel ideologically conflicted. What he felt was something far more dangerous: control. For the first time in his life, he was inside a structure that rewarded obedience, but could be manipulated by those who understood it deeply enough. He did not need permission anymore. And that is why when Hansen made his next move, it did not look like desperation. It looked like intent. He was not approached. He was not pressured. He was not seduced. He walked into the enemy's world calmly, deliberately, already convinced he was in control.
The FBI did not know it yet, but by the time they assigned him to help hunt a traitor, Hansen had already crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. And the most dangerous part was this: he did not feel like he was betraying anyone. He felt like he was finally proving something. Robert Hansen understood something that most traitors never do. Espionage is not about deception. It is about consistency. Lies collapse when they change shape. Truth survives because it stays the same. Hansen built his cover the same way he built everything else in his life: slowly, deliberately, without drawing attention. Inside the FBI, he made one decision early and never deviated from it. He would never try to be liked. Popularity creates memory. Memory creates patterns. Patterns create questions. Hansen avoided all three. He did not linger in hallways. He did not gossip. He did not complain. He arrived on time, left on time, and spoke only when necessary. To supervisors, this looked like professionalism. To colleagues, it looked like social distance. To Hansen, it was camouflage. The FBI, like any large institution, relied on behavioral shortcuts. People were categorized quickly. The loud ones were ambitious. The friendly ones were networkers. The quiet ones were assumed harmless. Hansen allowed himself to be placed into the safest category of all: the man who simply does his job. His assignments reflected that perception: white-collar crime, internal databases, analytical systems, roles that required trust but offered little visibility. Hansen was not chasing power positions. He was positioning himself near infrastructure. He wanted access without scrutiny, authority without spotlight, and counterintelligence provided exactly that. Inside this division, Hansen was responsible for building and maintaining systems that tracked foreign intelligence officers operating in the United States. He worked with names, patterns, movement histories. He helped design databases that mapped who was being watched and how closely. This was not glamorous work. It was foundational work, and that made it dangerous. Because Hansen was not just seeing intelligence, he was seeing how intelligence was protected. He learned where access logs were weak, which systems trusted clearance over verification, which compartments assumed loyalty once rank was achieved. Most importantly, he learned how slowly institutions adapt. The FBI was built to detect outsiders, not insiders who followed the rules. Hansen never violated procedure openly. He never accessed files outside his authority. Instead, he shaped his authority to include what he needed. Every transfer, every promotion, every lateral move was calculated. He positioned himself in roles that intersected with sensitive information without being at the center of any operation. Peripheral, essential, unquestioned.
Colleagues noticed that Hansen was highly competent with computers. In the 1980s, that alone made him valuable. Few agents truly understood emerging digital systems. Hansen did. He became the man people deferred to on technical matters, the man who helped solve problems quietly. Technical competence is a powerful shield. It creates dependence. When systems work, no one asks who designed them, and when they fail, people assume the problem is external. Hansen reinforced his image carefully. He lived modestly. He avoided luxury. He did not display sudden wealth. He spoke openly about religion, attended church frequently, presented himself as morally anchored. In the FBI, this mattered. Faith was interpreted as character, routine as reliability, restraint as discipline.
Hansen let these assumptions grow without correction. He never challenged authority publicly, never sought attention, never gave anyone a reason to look closer. At home, his life appeared equally stable. A wife, children, predictable habits, no affairs, no addictions, no visible pressure points. To counterintelligence professionals, this was critical. People who betray systems often leave traces: financial stress, ego conflicts, personal instability. Hansen displayed none of it. And yet, beneath that surface, a second system was already operating, one built on rituals, secrecy, and absolute control. Hansen understood that the most dangerous moment for any covert operation is the beginning. So he delayed gratification. He did not rush. He did not escalate quickly. Instead, he practiced patience. For years, his betrayals were incremental, selective, measured. He gave just enough to demonstrate value, never enough to create urgency. This was not recklessness, it was conditioning. Hansen was training his handlers to expect consistency rather than excess, to trust process over emotion. And while the FBI continued to refine its methods for catching foreign spies, Hansen refined his method for becoming invisible inside his own organization. He understood that suspicion is not triggered by secrets, it is triggered by change. And as long as Robert Hansen never changed, the system would never look at him, not as a threat, not as a possibility, not even as a question. By the time the FBI began to realize the scale of its internal losses, Hansen had already achieved the one thing no traitor should ever possess: institutional trust. And once trust becomes habit, it is almost impossible to break.
Every betrayal has two sides. One side is quiet, calculated, invisible. The other side is lived. For the men and women inside Soviet intelligence who agreed to work with the United States, trust was not abstract, it was not theoretical, it was a daily risk. They met handlers, knowing discovery meant prison at best, death at worst. They provided information, believing their identities were protected by layers of secrecy, code names, and compartmentalization. They trusted that the system on the other side was solid. They did not know that one man inside that system was quietly dismantling it. Inside FBI and CIA debriefing rooms, reports from Soviet sources were treated as victories, new intelligence, strategic insights, confirmation that American counterintelligence was working. Hansen had access to those reports. He did not need full names to identify who was providing the information. He did not need direct confirmation. Patterns were enough. The timing of intelligence, the specificity of details, the nature of the access. Hansen was trained to do this for defensive purposes, to protect sources. Instead, he reversed the process. He used the system exactly as designed, only in the opposite direction. Each time an asset provided valuable intelligence, Hansen could narrow the circle. Each time an internal memo circulated, the picture became clearer. Eventually, certainty replaced probability. And when Hansen passed those identities along, the consequences were not immediate. They never are. That delay is what makes betrayal survivable for the betrayer. For months, sometimes years, nothing appears to happen. Life continues. The absence of consequence creates the illusion of control. Then, suddenly, communication stops. A source fails to report. A scheduled meeting is missed. A coded signal is never answered. At first, handlers assume operational disruption, travel delays, illness, precaution. Only later does the truth become unavoidable. The asset has been recalled. Once summoned back to Moscow, there was no interrogation designed to uncover the truth. The truth was already known. The process that followed was bureaucratic, clinical, and final. The system Hansen betrayed did not simply lose information, it lost people. And yet inside the FBI, the losses were analyzed as data points. Which channels failed, which operations were compromised, which procedures needed revision. The question no one asked loudly enough was the simplest one. Who knew? Because the answer to that question was uncomfortable. Very few people, and among them was Robert Hansen. He was not present in the field when sources disappeared. He was not connected operationally to their handling. But he had something far more powerful: context. He understood how information moved between agencies, what was shared, what was protected, what was assumed safe. And he understood something else. Institutions are reluctant to suspect their own architects. Inside counterintelligence, there is an unspoken hierarchy of suspicion. Field officers are questioned first, handlers second, analysts last. The people who build systems are trusted to be loyal to them. Hansen existed in that protected category. As losses mounted, pressure inside the FBI intensified. Leadership demanded explanations. Congress demanded accountability. Interagency trust began to fray. But the conclusions remained external. The Soviets must have improved their counterintelligence. There must be better surveillance. There must be a technical breach. Every theory pointed outward. None pointed inward. Meanwhile, Hansen continued his work as usual. He attended meetings where the damage was discussed. He reviewed analyses of failures he had personally caused. He listened as colleagues speculated about causes that did not include him. And he said nothing. This silence is often misunderstood. It is tempting to imagine guilt, regret, hesitation. But silence does not always signal conflict. Sometimes it signals confirmation. For Hansen, each exposed asset validated his belief that he was untouchable. The system was responding exactly as he expected it to, by misdiagnosing the problem. Every adjustment made without suspecting an insider only deepened the blind spot. Every procedural fix that avoided human suspicion strengthened his position. The FBI was learning the wrong lesson, and Hansen was watching it happen in real time.
What makes this stage of the story especially disturbing is not the scale of the damage, it is the absence of resistance. No alarms, no sudden confrontations, no tightening net, just quiet disappearance, followed by far away, out of sight, reduced to case files. And that distance mattered, because distance is what allows betrayal to continue. Hansen did not see faces when he passed information. He saw outcomes. He saw leverage. To him, these were not individuals. They were proof. Proof that he controlled the system that once controlled him. And as long as that control remained intact, there was no reason to stop. Betrayal, when repeated often enough, stops feeling like a decision. It becomes a routine. For Robert Hansen, espionage was not chaos, it was ritual. Every movement had a purpose. Every action followed a rule. Every exchange was stripped of emotion. That was how he survived. Hansen insisted on dead drops, never direct contact. No meetings, no faces, no voices. People introduce unpredictability. Ritual eliminates it. The locations were chosen for their ordinariness: public parks, footbridges, spaces designed to disappear into daily life. Foxstone Park was not special. That was the point. It was close to home, accessible, unremarkable. Hansen would arrive without urgency. No checking mirrors, no exaggerated caution. He understood that nervous behavior attracts attention faster than confidence. The package was always the same: a plastic bag. Nothing distinctive, nothing memorable. Inside were documents copied methodically over time, not rushed, not excessive. Hansen never emptied entire files. He extracted just enough to remain valuable while avoiding patterns that might trigger audits. After placing the package, he walked away. He left without hesitation, without lingering. The signal came next. A strip of tape placed vertically on a signpost near the park entrance. It was crude, almost insulting in its simplicity. That simplicity was deliberate. Complex signals fail. Simple ones blend in. Later, another strip of tape would appear, horizontal. Confirmation.
Payment would follow at a later drop, cash, sometimes diamonds. Hansen did not touch the money immediately. That detail matters. Most spies fail because reward alters behavior. Spending changes habits. Habits create patterns. Hansen stored the money, separated it from his daily life. No sudden upgrades, no visible indulgence. He continued driving modest cars, living predictably, spending conservatively. The money was not the point. Control was. Hansen also controlled communication with absolute rigidity. He wrote letters rather than speaking, used precise language, avoided personal details. No emotions, no grievances, no ideology. He presented himself not as a partner, but as a resource. That positioning mattered. Resources are handled carefully. Partners are questioned. Hansen understood the psychology of intelligence services on both sides. He knew the Russians expected greed, ego, or resentment, so he gave them something different: professionalism. He dictated terms. He set boundaries. He refused requests that felt risky. This inverted the relationship. Instead of being managed, Hansen managed expectations, and expectations, once set, become self-reinforcing. Another critical element of his survival was pacing. Hansen did not escalate. He did not flood his handlers with material. He did not seek constant validation. He delivered consistently, then disappeared. Weeks, sometimes months. Silence created anticipation. Anticipation created caution. His handlers learned not to pressure him. That restraint protected him. Inside the FBI, Hansen mirrored the same discipline. He never accessed sensitive information immediately before or after a drop. He spaced actions deliberately. This created plausible deniability. If audits occurred, and they did, nothing aligned. No suspicious timing, no correlation between access and compromise. Hansen treated espionage like systems engineering. Identify inputs, control outputs, minimize noise. Risk was not eliminated. It was managed. The most dangerous moments were transitions. New assignments, new offices, new access points. During these periods, Hansen reduced activity, sometimes stopped entirely. He understood that change invites scrutiny, so he waited. Patience was his most effective weapon. Years passed, administrations changed, the Cold War shifted shape, the Soviet Union itself began to fracture, and still Hansen remained untouched, because nothing about his behavior suggested urgency, or desperation, or instability. The rituals held. What made this phase so effective was not intelligence, it was emotional detachment. Hansen did not celebrate successful drops. He did not mourn consequences. Rituals stripped the act of meaning. Each betrayal became just another task completed. And that is the most dangerous form of treachery, the kind that no longer feels like betrayal at all. To understand how Robert Hansen lived two lives without collapsing under the weight of it, you have to understand one thing clearly. He did not see himself as immoral. This is where many people misunderstand him. Hansen did not wake up each morning feeling like a criminal. He did not experience constant fear or remorse. He did not believe he was betraying a moral order. He believed he had redefined it. Religion played a central role in that belief. Hansen was deeply religious, not casually, not symbolically. He attended Mass regularly. He raised his children within the church. He spoke openly about faith as a stabilizing force in his life. To colleagues, this reinforced his image as a man of principle. To himself, it served a far more critical function. It created a structure for compartmentalization. Hansen separated his life into sealed chambers: family, work, faith, and something else, unnamed, unspoken. These chambers did not interact, and when they did not interact, conflict could be postponed indefinitely. This is how moral collapse often begins, quietly, without resistance, not through rejection of values, but through selective application of them. Hansen did not deny the existence of right and wrong. He simply removed himself from the equation. He framed his actions as transactions, not judgments. He was not condemning anyone. He was not choosing outcomes. He was providing information. What others did with that information was not his responsibility. This is a classic psychological maneuver. By shifting responsibility outward, the individual remains intact. Hansen reinforced this separation through ritual. Confession, in particular, became a paradox. He confessed regularly. He sought absolution.
But confession requires naming the sin, and Hansen never named this one. The absence of specificity mattered, because unnamed guilt does not demand resolution. It can be carried quietly. There were moments when cracks appeared, brief ones, instances where Hansen expressed anxiety about his activities, not to colleagues, but in private communications. Yet even these moments were framed carefully. He did not fear exposure because of consequences. He feared loss of control. Exposure meant unpredictability, and unpredictability threatened the system he had built. Hansen's moral logic was internally consistent. He believed the FBI undervalued him. He believed institutions exploited loyalty. He believed he was correcting an imbalance. In this framework, betrayal became symmetry. He was not harming the system, he was equalizing it. This belief insulated him from emotional consequence. When assets disappeared, Hansen did not imagine interrogations or suffering. He imagined outcomes. He imagined leverage. People were abstracted into variables, and abstraction is how violence becomes invisible. Inside the FBI, there were occasional signs. Nothing definitive, nothing urgent. Hansen could be abrasive, dismissive. He sometimes lectured colleagues about morality in ways that felt rigid, even judgmental. But rigidity is not a crime. It was interpreted as personality, not pathology. His religiosity, rather than raising questions, closed them. Faith was treated as evidence of trustworthiness, and that assumption mattered, because institutions rely on shortcuts. No organization can scrutinize everyone constantly, so it uses signals: faith, stability, routine. Hansen optimized for all three. The longer this continued, the harder it became to imagine him as anything else. Suspicion requires imagination, and imagination erodes when a person never changes.
By the mid-1990s, Hansen had been living this dual existence for over 15 years. That duration is critical. At a certain point, exposure stops feeling possible, not because risk disappears, but because the mind adapts. Normalcy expands to include the abnormal. Betrayal becomes background noise, and that is when people make their most dangerous mistakes, because they no longer feel watched. They feel permanent. Hansen believed he had reached that stage. He was wrong, but the system that failed to see him was not ready to admit it yet. Every long deception has a moment when it should collapse, a point where chance, human error, or simple bad luck pulls the thread too far. For Robert Hansen, that moment arrived quietly, buried inside a failure that the FBI never fully confronted. In the late 1980s, American intelligence became aware of something deeply unsettling. The Soviets appeared to know too much, not just about sources, but about methods. They anticipated surveillance. They avoided meetings. They reacted to moves that were never supposed to be visible. This was no longer just about a leak of identities. It suggested structural compromise. In response,